Marvelous. Okay, so we're perfectly on time. Our next speaker is Janet Sepulveda de la Rosa, who is going to be talking about Behind the Bees and Heatwaves project, lessons learned from PhD research with the Buzz Club. Over to you, Janet.
Perfect. Thank you, Dave. Hi, everyone. Good morning. Thank you for staying here. So today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about one of my PhD projects. It's called Bees and Heatwaves, and it involves citizen science. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about the lessons that I learned, specifically the advantages and some of the challenges that I encountered. So first, a little bit of background about my PhD in general. So I'm studying the impact of heat waves on the physiology and behavior of bees. So originally, all of the projects involved experimental work, so they were laboratory based, and they only involved bumblebees. So with this, we were able to get some interesting results. For example, we were able to determine the thermal tolerance of bumblebees. We also were able to determine whether they had acclimation capacity in response to heat waves. Also determine the impact of heat waves or simulated heat waves in this case, and how they affected colony performance, broodget behavior, and also the development. So this was very interesting and very fruitful, but when I was doing these experiments, I realized that there were some limitations to the lab-based studies. So for example, one of the most important ones is that experimental heat waves may not fully capture the complexity of natural heat wave events. So natural heat waves vary a lot. They're very complex. They include some factors, and when it comes to bees, like the quality of the resources where bees are foraging, also the quality or the condition of the habitat, which can alter the behavior or the interactions between plants and pollinators. There are some obvious factors in the laboratory, like limited space and artificial light, that may not enable bees to behave in the way that they would behave in the field. And another important factor that we get quite often with reviews as well is that commercial bees and wild bees are different. So for example, in terms of physiological traits like thermal tolerance, some commercial bees can be more tolerant to heat in comparison to the wild bees. So another thing was that when I was planning on one of the last projects that were laboratory based, I still had a lot of questions that I really wanted to get some answers for. So in general, I wanted to know what actually happens to bees during natural heat waves. More specifically, I had questions such as, can bees shift or alter their activity patterns in response to elevated temperatures to avoid thermal stress? So are they able to choose to forage earlier in the morning or later in the evening to avoid exposure to high temperatures? What plant species do they visit during heat waves? Do they prefer some species over the others? So we know with some laboratory experiments that heat waves or elevated temperatures can also alter the resources that plants offer. So these can also alter the preferences of bees. Do they also exhibit foraging preferences during heat waves? Do they stop foraging for pollen and start foraging for nectar, for example, or vice versa? And because most of my or all of my PhD project was involving bumblebees, mainly because of how practical and easy it is to get commercial bumblebees. I also wanted to know whether there were some differences between bumblebees, solitary bees, and honeybees, because they are also very important. So when I was thinking about how to answer these questions, I was thinking about the possibility of using citizen science. So I knew that there were some global databases that use citizen science to record species diversity, abundance, distribution, habitat use. So these are quite important. They were also mentioned by Beth earlier today, and they provide very important information. So I thought, what if we use also citizen science? What if we integrate citizen science into climate change research or extreme weather event research, not only to generate new knowledge for scientists, but also to generate new knowledge and to improve our understanding of the challenges that affect bees for us and for the general public. So I was lucky enough to have Dave as my supervisor, who was running the Boss Club, and Beth as well as my co-supervisor, Ellie as well as part of my PhD committee. So they all had a lot of experience with citizen science. And so the project of bees and heatwaves was created. And as I mentioned earlier, the main objectives were to investigate if bees, including bumblebees, honeybees, and solitary bees, can adjust their foraging times to avoid extreme temperatures, to investigate which plant species can offer resources for bees during these events, and to also assess changes in bee abundance or in bee activity before, during, and after a natural heat wave. So for this, we started advertising the project mainly via social media. It was both on personal social media like Twitter and Instagram, and also on the Boss Club social media, which was quite advantageous because we already had some followers. We also used some strategy like advertising a free beginners BID webinar with Dave to also attract more people, and at the same time for them to learn a little bit more before collecting their data and before doing their observations, so that they could be able to identify bees properly. So for those participants who showed interest, we would send them a data collection sheet first. So first we asked them to choose a patch of their choice. So it could be in their garden, in a park, in an allotment. But the main characteristics were that they had seen bees foraging there before, and that the size was roughly 2 meters and 2 meters. And then after that, they would send us that information, and then we would just check it and say if it was okay. And then we asked them to start their observations. So the observations were before the heat wave, when temperatures were fine, sunny, normal conditions, and they would do this for 3 consecutive days. Then during the heat wave, also for about 2 or 3 days, or during the whole duration of the heat wave. And then to wait a little bit, around 3 days, before recording their observations after the heat wave was over. So all of this was with constant communication. So because heat waves vary between regions, and we had participants from different areas of the UK, we told them that we would let them know when to start recording. So during these days that they were recording, they would record for a total of 15 minutes a day. So it was 5 minutes in the morning, 5 minutes in the afternoon, and then for 5 minutes in the evening. And this was mainly to see if there were some differences in activity. And then we would ask them to record the time, whether it was before, during, or after the heat wave, the temperature, the type of bee. So in this case, if it was honeybee or solitary bee, it would be just they didn't have to identify the species. But with bumblebees, we just based on the BID webinar, we were expecting them to be able to differentiate. We also asked them to record bumblebee activity, whether they were foraging for nectar, for pollen, or resting. And we also show them how to identify this, and just the plants that they were visiting. And so while I was doing this before, during, and after the project, I realized that there were some advantages, and I wouldn't say disadvantages, but some challenges of working with citizen science. So some of the challenges and some of the advantages were already mentioned by Beth. So it's going to be a bit repetitive, but mostly they are based on this specific project and my experience. So I'm going to start with the challenges so we don't finish with negative notes. So first of all, for me, participation and retention, it was one of the challenges. So less than 50% of participants who sign up actually contributed with their data. So based on the people that sign up, we were expecting around to have around 42 study sites. But in the end, we had a final number of 16 study sites. So even though this data was very valuable and they gave us a lot of information, we weren't able to identify any strong patterns. And maybe this would have been different if we had more data, but also with climate change studies or with studies involving temperature, showing some patterns or finding some patterns is always difficult. So you need long-term studies for this. So some of the things that I'm planning to do for the next round of bees and heat waves is we need to emphasize the long-term goals and the impacts of the project. So we need to be very clear with participants what they're getting, what we're getting as well, and what is the main impact of the research. Also consistent communication. We did have some consistent communication, but there were some challenges that I'm going to talk a little bit about, but it's important to, even if there's no activity, if they are not recording data, it is important to provide updates or maybe share educational materials, just maybe maintain open channels for dialogue. It's also very important to send results once we have them. So some people take part in citizen science projects mainly because they want to support research. And I have had a couple of citizen scientists from last year asking me if we are going to publish this in scientific journals. So it's always an advantage to show them that what they're doing, it's actually very impactful. We also need to explicitly acknowledge the role of citizen science in published papers. Another challenge was the timing of heat waves. So this is very specific to this project, but we were expecting we started collecting the data in July 2023, and we were expecting to have a heat wave around the end of July, maybe August, but in the end, the heat wave that we had last year was until September. So this is very important for several ways. For example, some people that chose their patch, by the points that we had the heat wave, the patch was not flowering anymore, so they had to change it. So that reduces the data that we receive, and also could be time consuming and maybe off-putting for some people. Also, some bees, for example, some bumblebee species are naturally dying at that point. So we did observe some changes in abundance, which could be due to the heat waves or could be also due just because of the natural death of bees. The availability of participants was something that was very important as well. So I did get some messages saying, we think so there's a heat wave coming. We would send them an email saying, prepare yourself because maybe this weekend we're gonna have a heat wave. And then I would get some emails saying, well, I'm gonna be on holiday. I'm not gonna be near my flower patch. So that is something that could have affected as well the data that we received. So obviously heat waves don't adhere to a strict schedule. They can occur at any time, and it varies among regions, so it may not align with availability of citizen scientists. And something that we were also thinking that it would happen was that maybe there's not going to be a heat wave at all. So that's also very specific of when you're studying extreme weather events, maybe they don't happen. So for example, we were expecting to have a heat wave in July, and actually it turned out that it was the wettest July in England since 2009. So that it was a very, very important challenge. So in these cases, what can we do, or what am I planning to change? We need to be very flexible. So we need to be open to changing the protocol. So for example, instead of only focusing on heat waves, we can broaden the scope. Another factor is that if you are planning to do something regarding extreme weather events or a similar project, it's important to consider that this is a long-term project. So this would give you some more flexibility as well, because if you don't get enough data for 1 year, then you may get more data the next year and so on. And it's also a good idea to collaborate with other organizations or agencies. So there are many agencies or other institutions or organizations that record temperature data yearly. So if we collaborate, we can still get some information for the people that weren't available or for the years that we weren't able to record data for any reason. So reliability and consistency is also another challenge. So how accurate and how reliable the data is. It can also vary in regards to the experience and the skills of participants. So we did have this beginners BID webinar, but not everyone attended. It was available for them to watch it later, but we're unsure if they actually watched it. And even if they did, it's not easy sometimes, or for some people to be able to differentiate between species, especially those that look very similar. And another thing that I also encountered was the name of species. So this would be data consistency. So for some people or for some regions, the common names of some species are going to vary, like cornflower. Another participant would call it bachelor's button, and another participant would write the scientific or the Latin name. So this could be also time consuming to be checking this. So it would be good to have some way to standardize or to be very clear with participants on what to write. And as I said, so when you're doing laboratory experiments, obviously it's very time consuming. It's a lot of commitment. You have to be almost every day. And with citizen science, it is similar. So even though you're not recording data all the time, you need to consider that you need to be there from the moment that you're recruiting, that you're advertising your project, if you are doing some training, or if you're answering questions and answers. You're answering some questions via email, for example, if you are updating participants. In this case, for example, I was in constant communication with the Met office to see whether we were going to have a heat wave, and I would have to communicate what they said via email. Obviously, data collection is always good practice to record your own data and not only to leave it to the participants. And then it just has to be constant communication even after you finish the project. So, as I said, it's good to provide clear goals and expectations and to maintain motivation in some way, clear instructions, educational materials, and maybe some incentives or rewards, maybe some certificates to also keep them motivated and for them to want to attend the webinars. And just, as I said, consistent communication and maybe forums for them to also have some sort of direct communication between the citizen scientist. And so the advantages, there are so many advantages. I'm just going to mention a few of them, but one of them is that in the case of heat waves, they obviously vary geographically. So we are able to record the data for participants all around the UK. So this is great because it would be otherwise very, very difficult, very expensive, very time consuming for just a small group of scientists or just one PhD student to be able to do this. Also, citizen scientists can monitor the behavior of bees under natural heat waves from the comfort of their homes and neighborhoods. So that's always a good way to advertise the project. They don't have to go out, and they can have a break of 5 minutes in the morning, 5 minutes in the afternoon for those, for example, that work from home. And it's also important to realize that they are not only volunteers, or they are not citizen scientists. They are also experts of their own study site. So they know their garden very well. They know the garden better than I know their garden or their park or their allotment. Also, cities are great for pollinator research. So some research suggests that there's more floral diversity in urban areas than rural areas. And as we know, most of the participants of citizen science scientists are based in urban areas, as the name says. And we can get very interesting results and a lot of data, even when we don't have that many participants. So for example, we taught them how to determine whether a bee was collecting nectar or pollen. And with this, they were able to write all of the diversity of species that they had in their own gardens or their own parks, and to determine whether they were foraging for pollen or nectar. And then this allows us to know what kind of plants offer resources during these times. And you can do it for groups like bumblebees, honeybees, solitary bees, or you can also do it at a species level. Also, cities are very interesting because there is a heterogeneity of temperatures and microclimates, and you can study, when you're studying temperatures, there are phenomena like the urban heat island effect that increases the temperature from 2 to 4 degrees usually, but there have been reports that these effects can even increase the temperature up to 12 degrees. So it's very interesting to see how heat waves impact different cities as well. And as I said, cost effectiveness, that's one of the most important things for during a PhD when you have limited funding, which was my case. So otherwise, I wouldn't have been able to get data from all of these regions because it is very expensive, and it also takes you a lot of time, and the PhD is usually a maximum of 4 years, so you don't have enough time to do this. You're also able to record long-term data, as I was saying. So this project is hopefully going to be a project that would stand for several years, especially because for climate-induced impacts, they tend to occur over long periods of time, longer than a PhD project or longer than a typical funding cycle. So this is a very good advantage of using citizen science during a PhD. And you can either continue with it after your PhD, or someone else can continue it for you. One of my favorite things was the outreach and the education. So involving citizen science in research obviously fosters community engagement. It promotes public awareness of pollinator conservation. These citizen science projects can incorporate educational components like the webinars, training, workshop, and it just empowers participants to learn about these issues that not only affect bees, but affect everyone. And you are able to get some feedback, which is great, and it doesn't happen with other type of experiments. So you can measure the impact as well. So you can see how some people said that it felt quite inspiring to be collecting data that might be useful to scientists. So could be someone that is interested in getting this data to be out there in published in papers. Some people really enjoyed to get to know bees better. They weren't that interested at first, but then they kind of changed their minds with the project, realizing it is possible to understand what bees are doing, whether they're collecting nectar or pollen. And they just started appreciating visits by insects, which is also, for me, this is one of the most rewarding parts of doing this citizen science project during the PhD. And obviously that you can do something with this data, and it can lead to direct action. So we were able to determine which plants are visited at different temperatures, and as I said, what kind of resources they are providing for bees at this very stressful times for them. And with this, we're going to be able to, well, our goal is not only to publish scientific papers from this, but also to create some comprehensive guides for the participants and for the general public to support bees during extreme weather events. And so this can also expand to other studies. It can also inspire other studies, for example, to study the effect of heat waves on beetles, on butterflies, on horflies, or any other insect that you can think about. And it can also expand to other countries or other regions. So that is also one of my long-term goals. So we know in this case, at least with last year, the heat wave wasn't that extreme, so it was quite mild. We had a maximum temperature from the recordings a maximum temperature of 32. But we know that in some other areas, heat waves are way stronger. They're more so they're more intense, they're more frequent, they are longer as well. So it is important to determine how this affects insects as well. So there's a lot of potential with citizen science. So for me, one of the most important is that it empowers people, and it also changes their behavior and the way that they see insects. So they start noticing what they do and how important they are. It can also impact policy. It can fill gaps. So citizen science tends to be quite prevalent in very specific areas, especially, for example, in more developed areas or developed countries. So if we use it in other, in developing countries or in other areas that are underrepresented, we can fill some very important gaps. And it also opens the door for a lot of collaboration, not only between the general public and scientists, but between scientists and other organizations as well. So just to summarize, so citizen science can facilitate data collection across diverse regions. It reduces cost and time constraints, which is very important, especially for students, that there are always some limitations when it comes to budget, usually. So there are many challenges, and that's very clear, but there are also opportunities for continuous improvement over time. So it is very important to get feedback, whether it's constructive feedback or just general comments, to improve the next projects or the next rounds. And so citizen science has a lot of potential to make a strong impact, to empower communities, to contribute to scientific discovery and conservation efforts, and for people to just care about current issues and about insects that are usually just overlooked. And so there's going to be, I didn't discuss the results really, because there's going to be another webinar if you're interested, in which I'm going to talk to you a little bit more in depth about the project and the results that we get and what is the future of the project as well. So thank you very much, and I'm open to any questions, comments, or even suggestions.